Hi there, I'm going to show you a variation on a downward dog, or a variation on a chest stretch or double arm stretch, however you want to come at it. Those exercises can be done in multiple ways. I mean, classically most people think of a downward dog as a yoga exercise, but it does feature a lot in Pilates repertoires as well. It's a very difficult exercise to perform, and it's that one where you kind of go into a pike position, feet flat on the floor, and then reaching down. In order for that to be done properly, there needs to be an awful lot of mobility through the chest and shoulders and thoracic spine, as well as adequate hamstring length and neural flexibility. So for that reason, I tend to suggest a lot of people don't go anywhere near a downward dog. But you might still want to get the benefits that exercise can deliver in its purest form. And that's where this version comes in really well. So I've got my 65 centimeter Swiss ball. I think that's a good size for most people for this exercise. And you'd be kneeling in front of it with your hands on top. Now what we don't want to do with shoulders is to immediately take them into a very stressful and potentially jeopardizing position. The further your arms come away from your body and the more your shoulders get stretched out, the more vulnerable that shoulder girdle is going to be. And it's a fantastically unstable joint in its kind of purest sense. The rotator cuff and all of the connective tissue around there keeps it anchored, but you've got to make sure that you've got the capacity to do that. So this is where this controlled version is really helpful. And if you're brand new to this, we've got to try and think about incrementally, gradually introducing load into the shoulders and then stretching out the desired structures. So to do that, we're going to roll the ball away from us. Make sure you've got a neutral spine here, I should have said before. So the lumbar spine is in neutral, the head is tucked back, all the usual things you'd think with your Pilates practice. And then you hinge from the hips like you're doing a simple squat. And as you take your hips back, simultaneously roll the ball away. Now this is already beginning to stretch out the chest and the shoulders. The further you go, the more you're going to feel that stretch. And that would be the simplest idea here. The hips have gone back, so we've offloaded the weight through the shoulders. And then we just hit the reverse button and come back up. The hands are shoulder width apart. You can try taking them wider, you can take them closer, see what feels comfortable. But as you're going away, there's a nice smooth movement. The chin stays neutral, you're not jutting forwards and looking out over the top of the ball. And here you get this nice sense of stretch through the lateral quadrant of the shoulder into the lats. You start feeling a bit of thoracic spine involvement as well. So it's quite a nice passive stretch. Now the further you go down, the more you're going to bring in that thoracic spine. So you're aiming to feel a stretch kind of between the shoulder blades. And it's a really nice position to be in. There shouldn't be any apprehension here. When it comes to reversing, even in the simple one, what I would encourage is thinking about using this section of your body to help get back up. So those who are going to be thinking about the lats and almost like the axilla, the armpit, lifting up. So imagine you've got a belt looped underneath your chest here, and somebody's standing up above you, and they're going to almost hoist you back up. So that it's not just a question of pulling on the ball. You're not thinking about the hands pulling back, and that subtle difference is quite important, because if from here you pull and try and activate your shoulders, they're in that vulnerable position for a lot of people. Whereas if you use the powerful lat complex and think about lifting up, you're simultaneously coming back to the start position, but you're really fostering this more powerful, this less vulnerable mechanism to get you back. So just by visualizing how you're coming back up, it can stop those pinch points developing in the shoulders. Now, for a lot of people, they'll need a little bit more than this. So that's where we move on to essentially the level 2. I'd start off in the same technique, coming out into your stretch position, and then here, however far we roll forwards will increase the difficulty. So we're coming into more range of movement. I can feel my shoulder line dropping towards the floor as the arms almost go up, and I'm getting an increased stretch through that chest wall particularly. Now from here, you've got two options. You can either roll backwards and then come back up, as we discussed in the first section, or if you're happy to progress and you want a little bit more of a challenge for that anterior wall of the torso and your core and your shoulders, we go into our stretch position, roll out forwards, and then from here is where we really need to think about that lat activation, that armpit activation, pulling up. So we start by trying to see if we can lift, as if we've got that belt underneath the chest. So there, we come back, and we simultaneously roll back. Now here, you're going to end up with your fingertips just on the ball, which is ideal because that shows that we've gone that extra distance and we've moved on to the second step. So you will feel a noticeable difference if you try and elevate from that further reached position, which is why you have to go into this incrementally, and that's why I've kind of favored these step-by-steps. Increased load, thinking about the optimal load to the shoulders, and thinking about drawing and lifting yourself back up from that powerful unit. You have to be really careful, particularly if you're rehabbing a shoulder or you've had shoulder problems before. You don't just want to go out into these big planking positions and putting all that strain on the shoulders if you haven't worked up to doing it. Now that said, when you go out into those more pronounced planking positions like I've just done, or that double chest stretch, mimicking the downward dog and where you get to in the downward dog with the arm position, that's kind of what you're aiming for eventually if you're equipped to do that. Again, I would still start off from essentially the same start position, but if you know that you're strong enough and you've worked up to go to that end position, you may just need to start with the ball further away from you. And that way we can stretch out, we can roll, and then I can really feel the work being done. Now when you get to this point, if there's any shaking on your ball, you've gone too far. But think about pulling back, lifting through that chest, and then coming back to the start position. So it's fairly self-explanatory from this point. If you want more difficulty, you increase the gap between the kneeling point and where the ball is, and you would end up reaching further. Super important, even if you're very well versed in these kind of exercises, that you never feel any vulnerability in your shoulder. Something particularly about a sense of pinching, a sense of apprehension in your shoulder joint, no feeling of tingling, numbness or pins and needles through the arms, which can happen very easily if there's any element of thoracic outlet syndrome or impingement going on in and around the shoulder girdle, and you want to make sure, of course, there's no pain. So when you're doing this exercise, think about those progressive steps. Even if you feel really confident at first, don't suddenly rush into doing those furthest reach positions because it can jeopardize the integrity of the shoulder. Anyway, it's a really nice technique. The ball also adds this element of fluidity and quality of movement. So think about those key Pilates principles. Slow, intentional movement, controlled movement, good quality of movement so you can really use the ball to eliminate any bouncing or any sudden lurching movements, and you're just moving seamlessly from your start position to the other. Think about hinging from the hips so that you're keeping a neutral lumbar spine through the entirety of this as well. There's all different things you can and probably should think of, but the fundamental one is make sure the shoulders feel happy with what you're doing all the way through.